Hey guys, how we doing? Richie, the Jordan Patrick Show. Very serious accusation coming out of NFL news today that actually overshadows Tom Brady's officially announcing his retirement. I'm probably going to do something on Tom Brady in the near future. This is a lot more serious, and I definitely want to hit on this. Definitely, potentially very troubling and bothersome story coming out of the NFL. Former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, Brian Flores, has filed a class action lawsuit against the NFL and three organizations: the Denver Broncos, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Giants. There's a lot of layers and a lot to cover on this lawsuit. So, what I'm going to try to do is break down each situation, each accusation pertaining to the different teams. And then I'm going to do my best to break this down because there's a lot of information on this, and I want to make sure that this is explained properly. Part of the accusation is accusing the Broncos team execs, which is led by John Elway, former NFL quarterback, of being hungover at his interview and essentially being disinterested, almost like he was just there and they didn't take the interview process serious. While it may very well be true, I think that this particular one is something that actually could be difficult to prove, just for the sheer fact that only a few people were there. Now, I'm not going to say that he's exaggerating or saying that this isn't a real thing, but given the substantiality of the other accusations where things can probably be proven a little more true, I feel that out of all the accusations, this would probably be the toughest one to prove. I mean, unless you were taping the interview, I don't necessarily know if you can say that these guys were acting that unprofessional, but if it's true, it's bothersome, definitely bothersome to say the least. This is what really ignited this with the New York Giants. Recently, the Giants' final choice for head coach was Brian Daboll, who was previously employed with the Buffalo Bills. As many of you know, the Giants recently hired Joe Schoen to take over upstairs as the general manager. And in the ensuing days, he's been bringing in a lot of former coaches previously linked to him with the Buffalo Bills. Now, this is really a crazy story because Bill Belichick accidentally texted Brian Flores to congratulate him on what he had heard about getting the gig with the Giants when the text was actually meant for Brian Daboll. So I can understand why anyone would be angry about that. Because the thing was, Flores ended up doing from my understanding, a second interview with the Giants after receiving this text from Bill Belichick. So essentially, he was going into this particular interview knowing that they already made their decision. And again, this opens up the door for potentially feeling that, racism was in play here because of the fact that there's something called the Rooney Rule, which I'm going to elaborate on in a little while to explain that better. But essentially, the reasoning behind the Rooney Rule is to give a more even playing field in terms of interviews for not only African American coaches, but minorities alike in terms of getting better opportunities to be interviewed for these jobs. Since the Rooney Rule was implemented, interviews have gone up from 6% to 22%. Now, while I'm sure there's a lot more that can be improved on this, that is just a stat that I do see as an improvement. Now, still on the Giants here, Brian Flores has accused the team of using the Rooney Rule on him, feeling that he wasn't a serious candidate. Like I said, Dable, essentially, according to Bill Belichick, who's not a part of the Giants organization, he coaches the Patriots, but has ties with them from previously in his career, broke the news. So, for lack of a better word, it's really shitty to find out about what's going on there in terms of why do you know, essentially, and it's crappy. There's no other way to put about it. Essentially, Flores felt humiliated, and I can understand to a level why he would feel that terrible about it. It's very sloppy. This is the one that I think is the most troubling. This is the accusation in the lawsuit that I actually think probably has the most credible merit to it. The Miami Dolphins started the season 1-7. And towards the end of the year, they got their act together, winning 8 of their final 9. Now, if this is true, this is really bad. He's accusing the Dolphins owner, Stephen Ross, of offering him $100,000 per loss to kind of jump in to get better draft positioning. I don't know if this was a motivation to move on from Flores. There have been a lot of conflicting stories saying that Brian Flores was not well liked by a lot of players and that there was a lot of controversy behind the scenes. But if this was Ross's real motive and Flores said to hell with that and they kept winning, this can open up a whole nother can. And it also leads me to believe that if you guys were 1-7, were you pocketing $100K before this happened? Because that would be illegal on Flores' part. Not accusing him of doing that, but it's a real fluid story that just broke today. And like I said, took a lot of attention away from Tom Brady's retirement today. There's a lot of things that are going to be revealed. And I'm going to get on this Rooney Rule before we finally wrap this up, because it's important, I think, for the viewer to understand what exactly the Rooney Rule really is about. But just a shocking story, really. It's kind of crazy. Now, just bear with me momentarily because a lot of layers to this. But to put it bluntly, the Rooney Rule was implemented some years ago because 2 particular African-American coaches, one Tony Dungy and one Dennis Green, the late Dennis Green, were fired controversially after having better records than their white counterparts that were also coaching at the time, and a lot of white coaches who were retained by their teams. In Dennis Green's case, he was fired after his first losing season. Whereas in Dungy's case, it was also very controversial. So when they got together, a committee of former players that were representing them and trying to bring this to the attention of the league and to make this a thing, also the motivation was to give African-American coaches, and like I said, minorities alike, a better playing field and more chance to get these interviews. Because when you went from 6% to 22%, if anything is being exposed, is that the diversity in terms of coaching candidates was definitely not where it needed to be. Now, I have mixed feelings on this on both sides that I want to explain. But essentially, that is how the Rooney Rule started. And I mean, in certain cases, it's led to a lot of good hires. Flores previously coached the Miami Dolphins past few years. He's a game over 500, but is coming off of 2 consecutive winning seasons. So when you see a coach get fired, when the team is kind of on the uptrend, that's always going to be controversial. I mean, you sometimes will see coaches get fired that are winning, but maybe they've been with a team for a longer time and maybe they haven't got them to that next level, so to speak. But this one definitely was a shocker when it had originally happened. And that's where a lot of questions come out. You know, is he good with people or is it the organization? And now you hear this accusation about 100K being potentially offered to drop games on purpose. That opens up a whole different layer it's gonna be ugly. And there's a lot to be seen here that's gonna continue to unveil itself. Now, this is my final take on all of this. As a New York Giants fan, it's not something that you ever want your team to be linked with. You know, racism is a very serious accusation and something that needs to be taken serious. But I will say this. While I don't think the decision to hire Brian Daboll as opposed to Brian Flores wasn't racially motivated, I do believe that the Giants were very sloppy. I think it is very irresponsible to allow somebody who is not in the organization to know what you're planning on doing. Because when you don't see the process through, and when you don't make your decision public, but a final candidate already knows what you're going to do because of his friendship with Belichick in this case. Belichick did coach with him. He was friends with both Daboll and Flores, and he accidentally texted the wrong Brian. But when something like that happens, it screams a lot of unprofessionalism and just sloppiness from the Giants organization. I think at minimum they are guilty of that. I do not happen to believe that this was based on race or racially motivated. And there's been a lot of back and forth banter amongst Giant fans. Some of them agreeing with what I just said, some of them feeling that there's more to this and that it was racially motivated, because a hot topic has been that the Giants have never hired an African-American coach. And that also led into a conversation about, with the exception of the one game that Eli Manning was benched, that an African-American quarterback has never been under center for the New York Giants, with the exception of Geno Smith when he replaced Eli. I have mixed feelings on that, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability to elaborate. When I look at today's college game and seeing that roughly 70%, 78% of college quarterbacks happen to be white, I believe that just based on pure percentages, you're going to have more white kids coming out of college that have a better probability of scoring NFL gigs in terms of being a quarterback. And I think the same percentages, if not even stronger, hold true for the probability of there being more black wide receivers. Like, for instance, you take a guy like an Adam Thielen or a Cooper Kupp who's going to the Super Bowl right now and potentially the best receiver in the league. Those are rarities. For running backs, a guy like a Christian McCaffrey is a rarity. I mean, you'd have to go as far back to the 80s when John Riggins was a superstar running back for the Washington Redskins, the former Washington Redskins, who no longer have that name. They're actually going to be named tomorrow, I believe. Yeah, I believe tomorrow they announce the new name for that organization. The Rooney Rule is a controversial topic as well. While I do believe it's important for there to be diversity, because right now the only black head coach in all of professional football is Mike Tomlin. While I do feel that there has to be more diversity with regard to head coaches around the league, my problem with the Rooney Rule is this. I feel that if you're being forced to interview a candidate solely based on their ethnicity, I feel that they are already playing with a disadvantage, because sometimes I feel that it sets up the system to just kind of go through the motions. oh, I got to interview this guy because of this. And I think it undermines really intelligent, qualified coaches because of the sheer fact that they might be being interviewed just because of their ethnicity. And sometimes in that regard, I actually think that it hurts a lot of these candidates. In terms of the New York Giants being a racist organization, I'm willing to listen to both sides of the argument because it's important to hear both sides. I myself have a hard time believing it based on certain levels. Emlyn Tunnell is a former New York Giant, and he's actually the first Black player to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Going back more on the managerial / coaching level, the New York Giants chose to not fire former GM Jerry Reese while firing head coach Tom Coughlin. Going back to players, Lawrence Taylor, while I'll never, ever deny that he's probably the greatest defensive player of all time, he had a lot of off-the-field troubles. And I think it would be safe to say that he wasn't exactly the greatest role model. But post-career has always been put on a pedestal by the organization. His counterpart, his teammate, Phil Simms, who was the quarterback of the Giants during those years, was unceremoniously cut right after their final game together. Simms was cut going into the 94 season. Point I'm making is that LT was kind of put on a pedestal, whereas Simms was kind of made an afterthought. I don't know. It's a very tough thing when it comes to accusing people of reasons and why they do or don't do certain things from a hiring standpoint. My final take on this is, like, while I do believe that there has to be a better system and more diversity when it comes to coaching in the NFL, as far as the lawsuit itself goes, I believe the one with the most merit is wholeheartedly going to be the one regarding the Dolphins, because that just seems dirty. It seems bad, and it seems like there's going to be people losing their jobs and possibly being banned from the NFL. Of course, you always have to hold out that possibility that Flores is lying. I don't necessarily believe he is. I think he's hurt. I mean, even with regard to the Rooney Rule in terms of the Giants, I don't believe that they designated that just to fit it in as a quota. And that is the other part of my problem with the Rooney Rule. It's a quota to make sure that you interviewed certain candidates. That alone, I think, undermines some of these coaches, and that's why it's messed up. But with reference to Flores and the interview, I don't think they necessarily put him in the bracket of Rooney Rule, get it over with kind of interview, because of the sheer fact that the Giants had already interviewed their defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham, who happens to be a Black man, for that same position of head coach. I think what happened here was a couple of things. I think the Giants got very sloppy, as I already alluded to, with allowing somebody from outside of the organization knowing what they were doing. That's mistake one. I think Flores was their second choice. When Brian Daboll, who was the ultimate hire, was linked to the Miami Dolphins as potentially becoming their head coach, I believe that the Giants wanted to make sure they got their guy. And I've already stated how the GM, the current GM for the Giants, is from Buffalo. And historically, based on a lot of different organizational tactics, normally when you get a guy, especially if you're giving him full reign to make the decisions, more times than not, he's going to take guys that he worked with. And that's part of the reason why I've always felt, going into this, after seeing that Flores was a candidate, I thought that the best fit for Flores was Houston, because of the fact that quarterback Deshaun Watson has said publicly that he wanted to play for him. And there was also a connection with Nick Caserio, who works upstairs and has links to Brian Flores from the New England Patriots days. This is going to be an ongoing and developing story. This is fresh and this is new. And I have a feeling that this may very well be revisited. But I hope I did a good job of explaining to you what's going on here. There's a lot of layers to this story. But I think the one thing we could all agree on is that the system has to get better with this. And I think it has to be asked if the Rooney Rule is helping these coaches or hurting them. Because to be honest, given the way that some of this offseason has gone and what this particular situation has brought to light, is that it does appear, not necessarily in the Giants' case, maybe so, definitely in Denver's case, at least it appears to be that way, that the Rooney Rule is unfortunately turning into something where these teams feel that it's just a quota, a check off on a paper, and it's obligatory. And I don't think it's fair to any of these coaches to go into those interviews and feel that way. But I appreciate you watching, and have a good rest of your night.